Hey, y'all, welcome back to the podcast. I am beyond excited for today's episode, and it is just a solo episode, but it is a huge celebration. If you saw the title, you know we have officially hit 200 episodes on the Decide It's Your Turn podcast. I launched this podcast back on February 1st, 2021, which was what is that? Almost 3.5 years ago. And there has been 1,300 days, almost exactly 1,300 days that have elapsed between when I started and when you are listening to this episode today. And I just want to begin this podcast by saying thank you. Holy shit. I would have never have thought, actually, probably I would have, because I'm not one to quit. But also, if you would have told me the time I first started thinking about the podcast to today, 3.5 years later, I just can't even believe it. And it all started with just an idea. I have to thank my amazing team, my husband, my coach, everyone for forcing me to do this podcast, because I will be honest with you, it took me a few months, probably more than a few months, to get on board to say, okay, I'm definitely going to do it. Because in the beginning of anything, and I'm sure you would agree with this, but at the beginning of anything that you've never done before, you're always a bit nervous. It always feels a little bit overwhelming. You're always wondering if it's going to work or if I should do it. Do I have the time for it? Do I want to spend the money on it? And slowly but surely, you just take action step after action step after action step. And sure enough, here we are 3.5 years later with over 200 episodes. And this is officially the 200th episode. But if you have listened to this podcast for a while, you know that we've done a mini series podcast, which didn't count towards the 200 episodes. We've done some bonus episodes along the way, but official episodes, we're now 200 episodes in. And I want to use this podcast not only just to look back, because I want this to be an episode where you actually take something away from it. Obviously, that has been my goal over the past 3.5 years, is for you to leave every single episode being able to do some takeaway or being inspired by something or put into practice. I always say, take what you want and leave with what you don't. And hopefully there's something out of today's episode that you can walk away with and be like, damn it, that's the thing. That's the decision. That's the action. That's the mindset, whatever it is. But I did want to start this episode by just saying thank you so much. Thank you so much. Whether this is your first one, hopefully this isn't your first one. If it is, go back and listen to a few. But if you have been here from the beginning, and I know that there is a few of you who have been here from the beginning, I just want to say thank you so much. I cannot believe it. I really can't. I know that there are some people too. And please tell me if you're one of these people. Whether I know you or I don't know you, whether you're a client or whether you're not a client, I'd love to know, who of you has listened to all of these episodes? I just cannot even fathom that, but I'm so grateful, because I know that there is a few of you who are those loyal followers who have been with me from the beginning, who have taken something away, who have left me a comment or a review. The only way that these podcasts really grow, because it's hard to keep up with the big people. It's hard to keep up with the people who are pumping out, 20, 30 episodes a week. There are some people that put out numerous episodes a single day. There's people who put out episodes every single day. I have been honestly doing the best that I can for the last 3.5 years, and we've done a little more than 200 with the bonus episodes. But like I said, we're on our 200th full-length episode every single Thursday. We have never missed a day, whether it be Christmas, whether it be, just a few weeks ago, we put an episode out on 4th of July. We've never missed an episode, and I'm unbelievably proud of that. And that isn't only because of me. It's because I have an amazing team. It's because I have support. It's because I have been able to keep promises to myself to say that I'm going to do these episodes no matter what. And you're the reason why I do them. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. So this episode, I really I had some ideas written down that I wanted to kind of go over. Number one, I want to go through moments, things that have happened since February 21st, 2021, when we first put out our very, very first episode. I want to do kind of like a guest recap, listener stories. I've heard some incredible stories from you along the way. And I know I tell you all the time, send me a message, write me a DM, send me an email, whatever. But I promise you, it matters to me so much. And you might not think that I care. You might think that this is full of shit. Hopefully you don't think I'm full of shit. Geez, if you've listened to all 200 episodes, dear God, I hope you don't think I'm full of shit. But I've had some amazing listener stories along the way. I want to kind of go through a bit of my journey over the last 3.5 years. I want to answer a few questions that you've had, future goals for this podcast for myself, just kind of what this looks like. And then obviously like talk about some guest stuff in the future that we have looking forward to, a few things that I have coming up, but this is kind of just going to be all of that recap. But I kind of want to start out, and I wrote a list because you guys know, if you're watching this over on YouTube, you know I'm not a big note taker, but I really wanted to I was having lunch. I did a video a few weeks back on my Instagram, and now it'll be definitely a few weeks back. But I put out this video, like it was just a snapshot of this video. I don't know, I just created some reel or whatever, but I'm eating like my absolute favorite lunch, which I got from my girlfriend, Macros with M. She was on the podcast a few months back. Be sure to check out Macros with M if you don't follow her. But she does these like quick hacks for like lunches and stuff like that. And there's been a few of hers that I have literally just ridden that wave. I'm not really I think I may have said this on this podcast before. I'm not a huge food person. So like I can eat the exact same thing. It doesn't have to be fancy. I don't really care about like fancy food and things like that. But I'm obsessed with this sandwich right now. And it's like one piece of sourdough bread, a piece of provolone cheese, sometimes two, in the air fryer. I put it in the air fryer for like 10 minutes and then I throw on some like ham or turkey. And now I've been dipping it in Firehouse sauce. Thank you to my girlfriend, Devin, who told me you can order Firehouse sauce. I ordered it from like walmart.com. Anyway, I'm eating that every single day. And it's so funny because I was doing this quick little video and everyone freaking loved it. And I wanted to, I don't even know why the fuck was I talking. Oh my God, my girlfriend, Therese, she's a client of mine. I just love you, Therese, if you're listening to this. She always tells me, Christina, you go on these little tangents, but I kind of enjoy it. I'm like, oh God, I just went on a full out fucking tangent while I was telling you guys about making my sandwich. Oh yeah, that's why. Made my awesome, delicious sandwich, went outside, sit outside. And as I was sitting outside eating my delicious half sandwich, I wrote this list of all the things that have happened since February 1st, 2021. See, my little tangents, they go like this. Oh gosh, you guys, sometimes I feel like I'm losing my brain and it makes me really sad because my grandma had Alzheimer's. I'm not saying I have Alzheimer's, but sometimes I just get so passionate. I just take like 17 different runs. My husband says I'm not losing my mind. He just says I'm crazy. And he is 100% right. Have you guys ever seen the Crazy Hot Matrix? If you haven't, Google it. I know some people, it offends them. Some girls, it offends them. Does not fucking offend me one bit. It just makes me laugh and want to pee my pants. But Nathan tells me all the time I'm crazy. I'm like, well, where am I on the crazy hot matrix scale? Because like, am I a 10 crazy or am I only like a 7 crazy? I just really want to know because I'm okay with being crazy. And ladies, whether you like to admit it or not, we're all some degree of crazy. It's just a matter of if you can find that perfect guy who can handle your amount of crazy. And lucky enough, I have been able to find a guy who handles my perfect number of crazy. But I'm probably like a 7, 8 crazy, which really isn't that bad. But anyway, on this list, if you're watching it on YouTube, on this list, moments since 2021. And I just kind of started writing down a whole bunch of things that have like really kind of happened since 2021. And I was sitting there eating this delicious sandwich. By the way, it's on my Instagram if you want the details. But eating this sandwich and I'm just thinking, well, nothing's really happened in the last 3 years. And then I started putting pen to paper. And I always say to my clients, I'm like, take your thoughts out of your head and put them on paper, because once you put them on paper, you can see actually what they look like. And it's just really helpful. And for myself, it was really helpful for me to say, oh, well, nothing's really happened since 2021, but that's not true. So pen to paper. Oh my gosh, what has happened since 2021? So since I started this podcast, and I think that again, this isn't about me, this is about you. And I just want to talk about all that's happened in the last 3.5 years, because I want you to see every single time you don't take action, every single time you talk about it, but don't actually do something about it. Fast forward 3.5 years, so much shit can happen. So if you take one thing from this podcast, take this, just start. Just start. It does not have to be perfect. When I first started this podcast, oh my gosh, I didn't know my head from my ass. I still some days don't know my head from my ass. but I am 3.5 years into the future and all of these things. And I'm sure there's so many more, but this is what I wrote down eating my delicious sandwich. I have worked one-on-one with over 200 different clients since 2021. I have changed my business model. I used to do a lot of group coaching. Now I only do one-on-one coaching. I also do speaking inside corporations, but really only one-on-one, because that's like, for me personally, I believe the biggest shifts come when you have someone one-on-one. I brought in, and it's so crazy to even think this, like, for some people, they might not think this is a lot of money, but for me, I'm pretty proud of myself. I brought in over $1.5 million worth of revenue into my business in the last 3 years. I've been to over 15 different countries in the last 3 years. I've had really hard conversations. I've had 5 or 6 different team members. I've had a team member come back. I've had really good conversations with clients, hard conversations with clients. I've had hard conversations with team members. I've had to let people go. I've had really hard situations in my business. I've had some really hard situations personally. I lost my grandparents since the time that this podcast has come out. And that was one of the hardest things I've ever had to deal with. My grandma was one of my favorite people on the planet, and losing her, it has been so hard, even though I feel like sometimes I have to compartmentalize it, because that's just what you have to do sometimes to keep moving forward. I've gone through different therapists and different coaches. I've had a new brand. We've done a recent new brand. I've updated my website. I've had really difficult conversations with clients. You can go back to a podcast that I probably put out about 6 months ago, where I talked about like the hard things behind the scenes in business, where I've had to send people to collections. I've had people quit on me. I've had to fight people for money. I've had contracts fall through. I've had to let people out of contracts. I have had some very difficult conversations when it comes to losing money. I've invested in certain things that have lost my ass. I've also invested in things that have created an unbelievable amount of revenue. My husband and I did one investment over the last, I think it's only been about a year, and we probably made close to $500,000 on that investment. It's truly incredible. Like, holy cow, that's pretty cool. But however, we've also lost a lot of money in a different investment. And I think that that's kind of helpful to point out. It's cool to be able to see that what's happened and what mistakes we've made, what good choices we've made, what choices we'll probably make differently in the future. I've made a lot of mistakes in the last 3.5 years. I've made some mistakes with clients. I've made some mistakes about not trusting myself. I've made some mistakes outside of business. I've had some really hard family conversations. I've had some really, really hard moments that have never been seen on social media, will never be seen on social media, that will never be talked about on this podcast. But I've had those happen. Why? Because I'm a human being doing a human thing. I've had some moments where I haven't felt confident. I've had some moments where I felt like a complete boss. I've had some moments where I've been kicked in the teeth, and I've had some moments where I just feel like I'm on cloud 9. There's a lot of things that have happened in the last 3.5 years, but the one thing that I can say is that I really have no regrets. I've taken a ton of action. I've done things that most people aren't willing to do. I've done things that some people would say are crazy. I've done things in my business that people think are crazy. I've done things that perhaps is not enough in other people's minds. But for me, I'm just super proud of myself. And I think it all started by just taking one action in front of another. A thing that I want to point out that I wrote down, that I went and looked back, since 2021, I have done over 154 free clarity calls where I have gotten a no from someone. And I want to point that out because perhaps maybe you are someone who I have talked to in the last 3.5 years who said no. And maybe it wasn't because I wasn't the right person. I never want to work with a person who I'm not the right person for them. Perhaps they chose someone else. However, I do want to point out that there is 154 people that I have talked to over the last 3.5 years that said no to themselves. And I would encourage you, if you are one of those people, I would have you ask yourself, have you done the thing that you said you needed to wait to do? Have you taken the action? Have you done the scary thing? Because so many people say, I want to wait. I want to wait until the right time. I want to wait until the money. I want to wait until my kids leave the house. I want to wait until my husband supports me. I want to wait until I lose the weight. I want to wait until whenever. Let me tell you, if you are one of those people that have said over the last 3.5 years that you just needed more time or it wasn't the right time, I would love for you to really get honest with yourself. Has anything changed? And if it hasn't, then perhaps you have to do something different. I was one of you. I was one of those people who waited. And that is the only regret that I have, is that I didn't start taking different actions. I didn't start reprogramming my thoughts. I didn't start getting out of my own way. I didn't start taking big leaps before I was ready. That was the one regret that I probably have, is that I didn't start this journey early enough. I talked about wanting to do this when I was playing golf for so many years. And I do believe that things happen for a reason. But I also believe one of the things that God gave us was our free will. And it's up to us to do things differently. And so looking back at this last 3.5 years of this 200 episodes of the podcast, perhaps maybe you and I were at the exact same stage at the exact same time. And I now have 200 podcast episodes under my belt, and perhaps you don't, or maybe you're further. I'm not speaking to you if you're further, if you're taking those actions and you're doing those things. But if you are someone who's been listening to this podcast from the beginning, hoping that you are going to do this thing and you're waiting for the right time or whatever it is, maybe it's not a podcast, maybe it's not a career, maybe it's something for yourself, maybe it's getting out of your marriage, maybe it's getting into the marriage, maybe it's putting yourself out there, maybe it's having kids, whatever it is, you're now 3 years behind where you could have been. I am no different than you. I am no different than anyone else. The only thing that I think I do really well is I'm just willing to do things. I'm willing to do them in spite of the fear. I'm willing to do it in spite of not knowing how it's going to pan out. I'm willing to take the risks. I do not want to sit on the sidelines. I do not want to have any regrets. And so hopefully, maybe you're listening to this going, fuck, what would have happened if I would have started 3.5 years ago? Like I said, there's been close to 1,300 days since I started this podcast. And a lot of good things have happened since I've done it. And not all good things. There's been a lot of, like I told you, I've lost my ass in a lot of things. I got my ass kicked in a lot of things. But I also will tell you, I don't regret any of those things because it's gotten me to where I am today. So I do hope that you just hear that and think, do you really want to wait another 1,300 days to do the thing that you say that you want to do? There's literally no difference between me and you. It's just that I'm willing to do the thing. And I want you to do it too. And that's why I always tell you, jump on a free clarity call with me. That's why I always tell you, I have my coaching membership. It is the lowest investment for one-on-one support with me. I promise you I will hold your ass to the fire. Ask any of my clients. I promise you I will help you get clear. I promise you I will hold you when no one else is holding you. I promise you I will help you make sure that you do not waste one more day by not doing the thing that you want to do. Is it scary? Absolutely. Starting this podcast was scary, but now I'm 1,300 days in and 200 episodes and bonus episodes. And the sky's the limit. I'm not stopping at any point in time. But I did want to point that out because I just thought, I looked at those 154 people that said no to themselves. And I really want you to hear that because my God, think about how far you'd be in 3.5 years, 1,300 days from now. One action at a time. It's not always roses, but fuck, is it worth it? So I just wanted to point that out and just throw that in there because I hope that does inspire you. I hope that does make you take one action step. I promise you it's so worth it. But let's talk about a few of the listener stories. It was pretty cool. So one of the things that I'll always look back at, and Katara, I just want to say thank you to you because you are a person who had listened to what you said. And you had listened to every episode, I think up to like 200 episodes before you sent me a message. And when you sent me the message that day, it just made me smile. And Katara was on the podcast. So if you go back and listen to her episode, it was really cool just to kind of hear her story of how cool she is and how magical she is, and her own journey of deciding it was her turn, and listening to her journey about writing her book and about sailing around the world and her running. And now she, she was a part of the, I believe, the British team to do this big cross country run. And I love getting to watch her. I don't look at her stories every day, but it's really cool to have a message from a person who's been listening to the podcast and watching me on YouTube every day from her grimy bus. She said she was listening to it on her grimy bus, and she sent me a message from her bus that morning, and it meant the world to me. I know that we approximately have 1,000 people a week that listen to this podcast, and it means the world to me that I know some of you, but there's a few of you who have never said hi, that have never told me that this podcast has helped you or that you enjoy it. And when she sent me that message, it really, really mattered. And it was just really, it was really cool to know that some person that I don't know across halfway around the world is listening to this, and it's giving her a sense of inspiration and giving her a sense of hope, allowing her to decide it's her turn. So it just meant the world to me. So thank you, Katara, for doing that. I've had messages from people that's, said that I've made them feel not alone. I've given them the inspiration to start. I've helped them start the business. I've helped them in their relationship. I get messages all the time about Nathan and I's relationship. And I'm not going to tell you we have the perfect marriage, but I will tell you it's the perfect marriage for me. It is the one thing that I am so fucking proud of. I'm proud that I found my faith and my, trust in God, my relationship with God. I don't consider myself a religious person at all, but I do have a relationship with God, and I have an amazing relationship with my husband because I put it as my priority. Those two things are my absolute priority. I would say behind my relationship with God, the relationship with my husband, my career is right behind that. My clients matter to me more than anything. When I get a message from clients, or not even a message, I've had a few clients say to me recently, and it still shocks me every time, but they're like, Christina, when I signed up with you, I knew that you would help me. I knew you're the person for me, but I didn't know how much you'd care. And it always shocks the shit out of me, because I promise you, I think about my clients morning, noon, and night, breakfast, lunch, and dinner on the weekends, whether I'm traveling or whether I'm sitting here at this desk. They matter to me so much. Like, this career just is like such a God-given gift, and I'm so grateful for it. It is hard as shit some days, and it makes you want to quit, but I'm so grateful for it, and I'll never quit. And I'm so thankful for that. So for all of you listeners who have told me that this podcast has helped you, I'm beyond grateful. Like, it's literally the reason why I do it. Half the time, I promise you, half the time, I have to psych myself up to sit here at this desk talking to myself. I have to psych myself up going, does it really matter? Is someone really giving a shit? Does people actually pay attention? But then every once in a while, I'll get those nudges from God. I'll get those, what I call the God winks, where I'm just like, okay, thank you for that moment. And, every time I get a message that this podcast is helpful, or every time I get a message that, whether it be my social media or my text message community or whatever it is, I'm very, very grateful, because sometimes, I'm a human. I'm a human being. I am confident as shit. I will figure out a way to yes. But I also am a human being that really likes knowing that what she's doing in this world matters. And so I thank you for that from the bottom of my soul. I promise you. So thank you for all of you who's ever sent me a message. Whether you did, I'm really grateful. Or whether you give me a 5-star review on the podcast or share an episode, because that's the only way that this podcast grows. There's a million people out there that do paid ads. There's a million people out there that have unlimited resources to put out so many episodes per week, and that drives them up the charts, and so they should. But for someone like myself, who's just been doing this consistently for, like I said, 1,300 days, over 3.5 years, 200 episodes, I'm beyond grateful to all of you who have supported me and just sent one episode to one person. And if that one person does the exact same thing, we can get this podcast in the hands of those who hopefully need it, who need that moment of inspiration, or that one guest who says something that really resonates. So, one of the cool things about getting to do this podcast is there's quotes that have come from this podcast that have ultimately changed people's lives and allowed them to have that one line to carry them through. And for me personally, I know that there's been about 3 quotes on this podcast, 3 from people that I really, well, 2 of them I really love and 1 person I really respect. So the person I really respect is Tomi Lahren, and she is a Fox News contributor. I was unbelievably blessed to have her on the podcast. I remember exactly where I was when it came out because I was so proud to share it with my dad. I was actually in Cancun with my parents for Christmas the day that this Tomi Lahren podcast came out. And I was just so excited to get to share it with my dad because my dad's a big Fox News guy. And he just thought it was the coolest thing ever. You know, my dad, I always made him proud when I was playing golf, but this career, he doesn't really understand it that much, but he does watch Fox News. So when I did get the interview with Tomi Lahren, that was a really cool moment for me to share that with my dad. And Tomi Lahren said something that I'll never forget. She says, know what you believe and why you believe it. And that has always stood with me for a really long time. I heard her say that at a conference, and then I followed up with her for months in order to secure that podcast. And I'm unbelievably grateful for her to do this. You know, she's been on some of the biggest podcasts in the world. She's been on, you know, the Him and Her podcast. She's been on so many podcasts, and I'm just very, very grateful that she chose to do mine. And that quote was just something that will always stick with me, which was, know what you believe and why you believe it. And that is, to me, confidence right there. So thank you, Tomi, for doing that. Another quote that was so great, that from a good friend of mine, someone I love. She was a client for so many years. Now she's just one of my good friends, Sarah Faith. And Sarah said, when you have 2 feet in 2 different ponds, you will drown. And that is basically get off the fence, make a decision. You know, when you sit on the fence, I believe it was the Clinton Anderson podcast where he said, where you sit on the fence, you get splinters in your ass. And this podcast is all about making a decision. And when you make a decision, there is no wrong decision, but sitting on the fence, you'll get splinters in your ass, or putting 2 feet in 2 different ponds, you'll drown. So thank you, Sarah and Clinton, for those quotes that I think were really, really instrumental. And then one of my absolute favorite humans on the planet, a good friend of mine, one of my absolute favorite podcasts. He was such a great friend for saying yes to do it. It was his very first podcast. And from what I know, I believe it has been his only podcast to this date, Jamie Johnson. And he is such a great friend. Obviously, he is an extremely famous country music musician. He is a songwriter, singer-songwriter. He's written some of the George Strait's biggest hits. And he said, when quitting is not an option, everything else is. And I think that that quote has been something that has a lot of people who have listened to this podcast, listened to that episode in particular, which to this day, 3.5 years later, that Jamie Johnson episode is still reigning the highest episode I have ever recorded download-wise. Mr. Jamie Johnson, when quitting is not an option, everything else is. And that to me is just the epitome of deciding it's your turn, just figuring out a way to yes. I really should have my good friend Todd Bish on this podcast. He and I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro together, and that's where I got my quote. There's always a way to yes. Todd is a good friend of mine. So I've used that episode. He's never been on the podcast. Maybe he should be in the future. By the way, if you ever have a guest that you want on the podcast and you can make an introduction for me, I would be unbelievably grateful. I'm always looking for good people who make a big impact in people's lives. So be sure to reach out. Maybe it's you who's listening to this podcast, or maybe you know someone who needs to be on the podcast. I'm always open because I want to make sure that we have the best, because I want this podcast to truly make a difference in people's lives. So those are some great quotes. Questions that I've gotten from people over the last 3.5 years about this podcast. Do I ever feel like giving up on this podcast? Let me take a drink of water before I answer this one. So the answer, I know it's probably not what you're expecting me to say, but the answer is, of course I want to give up sometimes. Of course I think it doesn't matter sometimes. Of course, I think it's extremely expensive to do this podcast. I don't make any money on this podcast. We don't do any ads on this podcast. It costs thousands of dollars each month to put this podcast together. Could I do it cheaper? Absolutely. Do I want to give up my time in order to do it myself? Probably not. But It costs thousands and thousands of dollars for me to have put on this podcast for the last 3.5 years. I'm still going to do it. It takes so much time. Like, it is a 95-degree day today, beautiful, sunny, middle of the day. I could be golfing. I could be walking. I could be at the lake. I could be having a nap. I could be doing whatever the fuck I wanted to be doing right now. But instead, I'm recording this podcast because I do believe it matters. I do believe that, for some reason, well, I don't even understand sometimes. I don't even understand sometimes why I do the things that I do, because sometimes it just feels like I'm banging my head against the wall. And yes, I've been doing this for 7.5 years. And yes, I show up every single solitary day. And yes, I know that people do believe it makes an impact, but there's days where I want to quit 100%. There's days where I just want to pack it all up and fucking learn how to make a coffee and serve coffee and just do less. There's moments like that, but I'm never going to do that ever. I'm always going to do this because I truly do believe that with the power and the tools that I have to help people get clear, stay accountable, decide it's their turn, listen to that still voice inside of themselves, get rid of the overwhelm, reprogram the stories, patterns, and habits that got them where they no longer want to be. The tools that I know and how much I love what I get to do, I saved my own life. And I know that this sounds so crazy, but I did. And I remember praying to God, asking him to help me. And I can't not do this job. So that's why I'll forever do it. Because I know what it was like to be where I was, and I know what it's like to be where I am now. And I know for a fact, you can call it confident, you can call it cocky, you can think I'm crazy. But I know for a fucking fact that I can help people. And I know for a fact that this is my calling in life. Because as much as you think that this might be easy, this is not easy. It would be easy for me to go get a job that I could probably get paid a lot of money to do. I'm actually again, this isn't cocky. I have a lot of talent. I'm very good at a lot of things. I have a wonderful personality. I know business. I'm a hard worker. I can get anything done. I could probably go and get a job where I get paid $200,000-$300,000 a year. I know I can. I had a job offer where I could make probably $1 million selling high-end real estate to very high-end people. And I turned that down for numerous reasons. But I will tell you, this job sometimes is so fucking hard. Holding everyone's stuff, holding everyone's insecurities, fears, overwhelm, helping people get clear, holding people accountable, holding the good things, the bad things, the comments, the questions, the concerns. It's not an easy job, but I'm so fucking grateful for it. And I truly do believe that God has given me this path to be able to hold it. I don't have kids. I have the flexibility. I'm good at what I do. I help a lot of fucking people. And I say that not for me, because none of this is for me. I truly do believe that I am just listening to God's calling for my life. I really do believe that from the bottom of my soul. And maybe some people agree with me and maybe some people don't, but I don't really give a shit because this is between me and God. So this is the reason why I will continue to do this for the rest of my life until something decides to change or I get a different calling. But to think that I don't want to quit, to think that it's always just easy for me is fucking bullshit. It's a decision every single day. And I don't take it lightly. I really don't. Another question I got was, do I ever feel not confident? Of course I don't feel not confident sometimes. Of course I don't feel confident sometimes. Of course I'm nervous sometimes. But I just know what it's like to feel that feeling and act anyway, to feel that feeling and do it anyway. And that's why I always say that confidence is a muscle. I know what that feeling is, and I know that that's just a feeling and I have to act anyway. Like, and that's just how I've gotten better at it. And the more that I can feel it, the more that I move forward, and I figure it out every single fucking time. I'm willing to fall on my ass. I'm willing to say things that might piss a few people off. I'm willing to do things that are outside of the norm. I'm willing to like fall down. I'm willing to say when I fuck up. I'm willing to do whatever it takes always. And I think that that is why I can say that I'm so confident, is because I'm just willing to figure it out. But of course, I always feel nervous. Of course, I feel scared. Of course, I don't feel confident. Of course, I want to say no to certain things. I just fucking don't. I think it's just that simple. Is there anything else that I want to do? Yeah, there's a lot of things that I want to do. Business wise, I don't really know what those things are yet, but like life wise, there's just so much shit I want to see. There's so much shit I want to do. I just love humans. I don't really even care what it is. I just love getting to see different things. I just really, my main focus is just to continue. I tell my trainer all the time, I just want to stay mobile and I want to be able to stay young. That's it. That's all I care about. I literally don't care about anything else. I just want to be able to do shit. I want to be that 90-year-old who just does shit and goes everywhere and has my mind. Besides that, I don't really care, because besides that, it just doesn't, nothing really seems that important. So I guess that's kind of a crappy answer, but that's my answer. So like, that's the honest to God truth. What are my future goals? What are the goals for this podcast? The goals for this podcast are just to continue to show up, continue to add value, to continue to get some amazing guests. I will tell you, over the last year, probably, where I've really been tapping into my YPO connection network. So YPO is Young Presidents Organization. We've had some amazing guests from YPO on the podcast. Be sure to go back and listen to some of those episodes, but continue to tap into that network. Oh my God. Like fucking people have done amazing shit in this world, who've made so much money, made so much impact, who are people that you would never know, because half of them do not even have fucking social media, which makes me so happy, because sometimes I think there's just this big false facade of what success is on social media. But these people have actually done some amazing, awesome, cool things in this world. And so I'm so grateful that I have that connection for you guys to get to hear from people who have done amazing things, who are so passionate about what they do. I mean, a good example of this is Duncan, who was just on our podcast. He was Journeys with Purpose. You know, I'm not really into conserving the world. Like, conservation is not like one of my passions. I'm like, okay, good, you know, whatever. Like, maybe that's you're super passionate about that. I'm really not. But what I am passionate about is the person who is passionate about what they do. You know, I'm a person who gets so fucking excited about the power of the mind and reprogramming your thoughts and deciding it's your turn. Like, I am so passionate about this. There might be someone like Duncan who is so passionate about conserving the world and, like, you know, climate change and animals and all of that kind of stuff. I don't really care about the thing that he cares about, but I am obsessed with his passion he has for what he gets to do. You know, I always go back and think about All Seated in the Barn. Oh my God, she was so fucking passionate about saving these horses and these zebras and these donkeys. Oh my gosh, Talia. Like, I mean, just holy cow, she was so passionate about that. So I go back to, you know, that episode. That to me is so exciting. I just want to continue to have people on the show that are just so passionate about what they're talking about, because I think it helps other people listening to this fall in love with their passion and do the thing that they're meant to do in this world. And so that to me was so exciting. You know, but what do I want to do with this podcast? I want to keep trusting myself. That is the number one thing. I think I'm really good about trusting myself and blocking out the noise, and I really don't give a shit what people think. You know, keep doing the things that push me. I keep wanting to say yes to things that seem really, really scary. Kind of going back to, am I always confident? Fuck no. But I like always pushing myself to do things that kind of scare me a little bit. Getting a yes for something that in the back of my mind, I'm like, maybe they'll say no, and then I won't have to do it. But every time they say yes, and I just fucking show up to it. Like, that's fun. To me, that's the point. That's the purpose, you know? For me, and you know, what is my goal? Like I just said, my goal in life is just to stay mobile, agile, continue to travel, and have the best fucking time that I'm on this planet, and make an impact. And, you know, whether that's making an impact in someone's day just by smiling at them, or making an impact in their lives and their families and their business, that is my goal. So Oh, guest recaps over the last 3.5 years. I think this is kind of cool. Number one, my amazing husband, Nathan. He has been my number one guest on this podcast. I think he's been on the podcast over 5 times now. And something that I want to point out that I think is really cool, my career, my small business, obviously I do well, but nothing compared to what my husband does. And I think it's really cool that what his very first episode, I think, was episode number 3 or number 4, and we talked about, and in the title of the podcast is thoughts from a business, the owner of a $30 million business. What I think is really cool over the last 3.5 years, and if you know anything about business, to be able to say that you've almost doubled your business revenue in 3.5 years is pretty fucking incredible. And my husband has, this past year, he will probably surpass $60 million in business revenue. So just 3.5 years ago, which will probably be 4 years by the time he does it, he will have doubled the amount of revenue in his business. And I'm unbelievably proud of this man. I am just so proud of him, and I'm so grateful to get to call him my husband, and all of the things that he does behind the scenes that no one will ever know, and the hard conversations and the blood, sweat, and tears that this man has put in to not only create the company that he has done, but create the company at the level he has been able to create it, and really putting his customers and his employees first, and creating the culture and the systems and processes, and be able to do that over the last 3.5 years. I'm unbelievably proud of him, but pretty cool to see him on this podcast for 5 times now. I think he's been on the podcast 5 times in the last 3.5 years, and he will continue to be, because I will continue to force him to do it. So thank you to my amazing husband, Nathan. Like I said, so many YPO guests over the last probably about 1.5 years I've had them on. And I just have to say my favorite, I'm just so unbelievably grateful. When I had TP Chopra on the episode, I was so nervous about having him, and just seeing the fact that he was the president of GE, and he has this sustainable energy company, and he's created so much revenue and had, thousands of employees. And I was so nervous to do that podcast episode with him. And still to this day, probably one of my top 5 favorite episodes I've ever got to do. So TP Chopra, that's really cool. Bozeman St. John, which is so cool. I had Bozeman St. John's on the podcast. She was obviously the chief marketing officer for Netflix and Beats by Dre, but now she's a housewife. So I may actually have to watch Housewives now that she's going to be a housewife. I have never, I think she's on the Orange County. She's either in Beverly Hills or Orange County. But Bozeman St. John was on the podcast, and so fucking cool. She's going to be on the Housewives this year. I've had Natasha from Trader Joe's, her sister who owns All Seated in the Barn, Talia. Clinton Anderson podcast, obviously, that one was really huge. A lot of you listeners now are a big fan of the Clinton Anderson podcast, had him on the show. Damon West, Molly Fletcher. I did get some flack for having Vegas Dave on the podcast, not only once, but I had him twice. I promise you, I actually had to block my phone number for a little bit because so many people were very unhappy about that situation. I don't regret it for a second. I think what he did on social media is pretty incredible. And then my good friend, Jamie Johnson, Molly Fletcher, and then some of my closest girlfriends who I've just been so grateful to have them on the show, because you don't have to be a celebrity. You don't have to be famous to have an amazing story about deciding it's your turn. My best friend, Justin, my good girlfriend, Leah, my good girlfriend, Kat, my co-host for upcoming at Anything But Average Women's event, my co-host, Brittany Anderson. She's been on the podcast. I've had clients over the years on the podcast, unbelievable people on the show, whether it be big names, smaller names, people just like you and me who have made a big impact in this world by deciding it's their turn. So 200 episodes, 1,300 days, 3.5 years. We have done this damn podcast, and I couldn't have done it without you, because if you didn't listen, I wouldn't continue to show up. So I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my soul. I'm unbelievably grateful. Thank you for sharing an episode. Thank you for rating, reviewing us. That's how we get this podcast out. I thank you so much for sending me a message, 501-222-3362. Just tell me what you think about the podcast. Tell me what you want me to talk about. Tell me if you have a great guest for me, or just tell me how it's made an impact in your life, because I promise you, it's why I'm going to continue to show up for another 1,300 days, 200 more episodes. You guys, I appreciate you so, so much. Thank you again for listening to the podcast. I could not do this without you. I will see you next week for episode 201.